Is it personality, character, behavior? What is it that determines how valuable each of us is? Welcome to this week's episode of the Bites of Judaism podcast, helping you unlock your best life, know your why, and be everything you were born to be. To subscribe to the podcast, go to RabbiGlick.link/podcast. This podcast has been made possible by Mr. and Mrs. David and Malki Smetana. This special Shavuos episode is dedicated in the merit of the safety of our people in the land of Israel. To dedicate a future episode of the podcast, be in touch at podcast@RabbiGlick.com. And quickly before we start, please help this message reach more people by sharing this video wherever you share things, social media, WhatsApp status, wherever it is that you share things. So what is the main thing that decides how valuable each of us is? Now, generally as a rule, value is subjective, right? How valuable any given thing is, and a product, a service, a person, an object, whatever. How valuable something is going to vary from person to person, and different things hold different values to different people, right? When it comes to the market value of a product or a service that's sold on the market, different products are going to be worth different amounts of money to different consumers, right? Some people, at any given price, there'll be some people who think that it's worth that price and some people who don't. And the higher the price, the fewer the people to whom the product or service is worth that price, and the fewer the customers there'll be. The lower the price, the more people will find it, worthwhile. And that's going to depend on how valuable the product or service is to any given person, and how valuable money is to any given person, right? And for any given person, the balance between how much they value a given product or a service and how much they value money is going to determine how much they're prepared to pay for it. So, every object, every service, every event, every person, everything is going to have different value for different people, because value is subjective, right? And how worthwhile any given thing is to us depends in large part on our value system, right? On the system based on which we value things. So, and say, for example, someone for whom money is very, very valuable, right? Someone who values money very highly. For that person, in their value system, it's worth spending long hours at work and working very hard, because the value of the money they earn by doing so is worth that amount of time and, that level of effort that they put into their work. If for someone else, maybe they don't value money quite as highly and they value their family very highly, they might choose to work less hours, even though they'll have less money, because they'd rather spend time with their family, because family's more valuable to them than having more money. Now, obviously, this is, an oversimplification, and some people have to work long, hard hours just to get by, etc. But, keeping things relatively simple, the more someone values money, the more interested they're going to be in spending more time and more effort working to make money. The less valuable money is to someone, the less they're going to feel the need to spend their time and effort to make more money. And the same is true of anything. The more someone values their time they spend with their family, the more pressure they'll be prepared to deal with in order to spend that time, and the more they'll be prepared to forego some potential income in order to spend that time with their family, etc. So, how valuable any given thing is going to be is going to depend on who's evaluating it, right? And what their value system is. So if we ever want to answer this question about anything, right? How valuable is something? Again, whether it's an object, a product, a service, whatever it is, if you want to, ask someone, let's say, how valuable something is, and get them to evaluate it and give you an estimate, let's say, of how valuable it is. First of all, you want to be asking someone who has a value system that you find valid, right? You're not going to ask someone who has a completely different value system to yourself about how valuable something is, because they perceive value differently. And at a minimum, you need to ask someone who has a value system that is similar, at least, to yours. And ideally, it's nice to ask someone whose judgment you respect, right? So if you can find someone who has similar values to yourself and someone whose judgment you respect, that might be a good person to ask, about how valuable something is, any given thing in life. Now, if you want to figure out how valuable something is, you want to ask someone how valuable something is, you need to find someone, again, whose value system is similar enough to yours and who you respect, but also someone who, is qualified to have a valid estimate in the context of whatever field it is, or whatever the thing is that you want their suggestion or input on, right? If you want advice or clarity in life, for example, you want someone who has a track record of wisdom and giving sage life advice, because that means that they're a person that it's worthwhile getting their opinion from, getting an opinion from in terms of life advice. You want to know how something works physically. It'd be a good idea to ask a scientist, an engineer, a biologist, depending on what the kind of thing is. Someone who is informed and someone who's qualified and reliable to have a valid opinion about the value of these things. You want to know the market value of a product or of a service. You want to ask someone who's informed, and involved in this market, someone who's involved in the business of the market that you're finding you want to get an evaluation in. So value is subjective. Value depends on the thing we're valuing, on the value system of the person who's evaluating it, etc. So if we want to, come back to this question, how valuable is any given one of us? How valuable am I? How valuable are you? How valuable is each of us? There are a lot of things that are going to influence how valuable a person is, right? And it's going to depend, again, on the context. If you want to know how valuable someone is as a prospective employee in your business, you're going to want to know their talents, their gifts, their strengths, their weaknesses, etc. If you want to know how valuable someone is going to be, as a student in your educational organization, in your school or university, college, etc., you're going to want to know how academically capable they are. You're going to want to know how committed to study they are, how interested they are, how resilient they are as a student, etc. So there are a lot of factors that are going to contribute to how valuable each of us is in all different contexts, and it's going to depend on what the context is, in what the thing is that we're being evaluated for how valuable we are as a student, as a prospective employee, as a friend, etc. Right? All these things. For each different situation, each of us is going to have, a different value based on our strengths, weaknesses, characteristics, etc. But if we want to really drill down to the question of what is the ultimate, truest value of each of us? What determines our ultimate, most objectively true, or just most true value? And that's going to be our value in terms of purpose, our value in terms of, the meaning of life and the purpose of existence, etc. And the one entity, right, that we would be best off asking or seeking this evaluation from to find out how valuable each of us is obviously going to be the creator of the universe, the creator of Earth, the creator of life, the creator of humanity, and the creator of every single one of us. Now, we can't ask the creator in conversation verbally, obviously, how valuable each of us is. I mean, we could ask, but let's say we're unlikely to get an audible answer. But what we can do, right, actions speak louder than words. We can't ask for a verbal answer, but we can look to the creator's behavior, and we can look to how the creator values each of us and what that valuation depends on. And when we see, based on what it is that the creator evaluates each of us and for what the creator values each of us, that's going to give us the answer to what is it that determines each of our values, what determines how valuable each of us is. So there's one behavior in particular that we can look to get an idea of this. And this is something that, we have an account of happening numerous times in the Torah, and that is when God counted us, let's say in the desert, right? When the first several times it happened on the way out of Egypt, on the way to Mount Sinai to get the Torah, then later on a number of times throughout our journey in the desert, right? Well, why do you count something? First of all, in order to be interested in counting something, it has to be valuable to you. You're only ever going to count something of value. If it has no value, you're not going to be interested in knowing how much or how many of it you have. And there's going to be no point in counting. It's not going to be worth your time and effort. So as soon as someone's counting something, we already know that it's valuable to them. And, ultimately, the more valuable something is to us, it's likely the more valuable something is, the more frequently, the more often, the more regularly we're likely to count it. If something's really, really important and you always want to know exactly how much you have, you're going to count it very frequently. If someone's working really hard to build up savings, they might check their savings account or their piggy bank or whatever it is very regularly because they're working hard and it's important and they always want to know how much of it there is. So when Hashem repeatedly counted us throughout our journey from Egypt to the land of Israel, that's already an indication of the fact that we're valuable. And obviously substantially valuable to God because God is counting us repeatedly. But the thing that's interesting about counting is, on one hand, when you count how many of something you have, how many dollars in your savings account, for example, that, is an indication of the fact that the money in the savings account is valuable, so you want to know how much you have. But, if someone has, let's say, if a couple of little kids of young children have stamp collections or coin collections or baseball card collections, right? And they ask each other how many cards they have, how many cards do you have? I've got this many, how many cards do you have? Right? The cards are important and valuable to them, so they want to know how many they have. But if you're talking to a mature, sophisticated collector of stamps or baseball cards, old school valuable baseball cards or valuable cards, cars or watches, anything like this, where each car, each watch, each stamp, each baseball card is unique. Some are more rare than others. Some are more aesthetically beautiful than others. Some are maybe... Each instance, each example has different characteristics that make it more or less valuable, right? So if you have a couple of mature, sophisticated collectors, people who really know about the thing that they're collecting, and they're talking about their watch collection, their coin collection, their car collection, whatever it is, and one of them asks the other one, "Oh, how many do you have?" Right? That's going to be a very superficial question to be asking, right? The thing that they might be more likely to ask is, what are some of the highlights of your collection? What are some of the most valuable pieces in your collection? What are the most unique, rare baseball cards or coins in your collection? What's the most beautiful or rare car in your collection or watch or whatever it is, right? Because each instance, every car in a collection, every watch in a collection, every stamp or baseball card in a collection has a different value. Some are more rare, some are more, beautiful, some are more mechanically advanced or sophisticated or whatever it is, and all these factors are going to contribute to how valuable it is. So the value of a luxury car or watch collection or a baseball card collection or a stamp collection doesn't necessarily correlate at all with how many items there are in the collection, right? You could have someone who has 6 cars in a collection, or I don't know if you'd call that a collection, whatever it is, 10, 20 luxury cars in a collection that's worth way more than someone else's collection with 500 cars in it because of the specific cars that they have in the collection. The same with, any of these sorts of things. If you have, a handful of the rarest baseball cards in the world, that's going to be worth a lot more on the market of baseball card collectors than, 500 basic, simple, easily available, readily available cards. So if you're counting how many of something you have, that immediately tells you, assuming that the person understands, what they're counting and the value, that tells you immediately that every unit in this collection has the same value, right? When you want to know how big your savings account is, or how well you're doing in saving money, the thing that counts is the number of dollars in the savings account. Because every dollar is worth the same value, assuming it's the same currency, right? A dollar is a dollar is a dollar. So it doesn't make a difference, and it makes a lot of sense to say how many dollars in your savings account. When it comes to, things where every item has different value, it doesn't make sense to ask how many. I mean, you could ask that as well, how many do you have? But what's much more important and interesting and relevant is what's, which specimens do you have specifically? What are some of the most valuable ones that you have? You might be curious about how many as well, but how many is far less relevant than which ones, if each item has a different value. So when, on the way out of Egypt, on the way to getting the Torah on Mount Sinai, and the subsequently several times throughout our journey, when the Creator says that he wants us to be counted. He wants to, to count how many of us there are. And each person receives the same one count in that counting. That tells us already, it doesn't tell us what the characteristic is, but it does tell us that every single one of us is equally valuable, right? God's counting how many of us there are as an expression of the fact that we are valuable, so we're being counted. And if in that estimation or counting of how many of us there are, because of that value, every single individual is counted equally one time, that means every single one of us is equally valuable. Every single one of us has the same value and is equally counted the same one time, one count per person, because we're all of equal value. So if we're all unique, right? We have different strengths, different weaknesses, different talents, different personalities, and frankly, different behavioral histories, right? We have different histories in terms of the things we've done throughout our lives. Some of us have done lots of really good things. Some of us may have done, some less good things. So what is this common factor that makes that's valuable, and that's so valuable that makes the Creator want to count how many of us there are? And it's exactly identical in terms of its value across each of us. And this characteristic that makes us valuable makes every single one of us equally valuable. Right? So if we want to know how valuable each of us truly is, right, and the best source to go to for that answer is the Creator, we already have the answer that each of us is equally valuable. But why? If each of us is unique, and the fact is that, some of us are more talented and capable than others, and some of us do use our talents and abilities more than others, and some of us do achieve more, and some of us work harder, and some of us are, maybe nicer than others, and some of us work harder than others. So how does it make sense that every single one of us is equally valuable? Like, it sounds nice, right? It sounds nice to say we're all equally valuable, but how does that work? Because if we look at all the things that make us who we are, it doesn't look like that's the case. So how is it the case? What is it that, as far as God is concerned, is valuable and makes us valuable and makes each of us equally as valuable as each other? And the answer to that is, it's not our gifts or our talents. It's not even our behavior. It's not how we behave. It's not what we do. It's not how nice we are. It's who we are. It's who we are that makes us valuable to the Creator. Now, we need to break that down a little also, because who we are, well, what does that mean, who we are? Each of us is different, right? And who we are is to a degree made up of how capable we are, how gifted we are, how we behave, our disposition, our manners, our personality. All of those things are part of what make us who we are. But ultimately, right, we just talked about, look at the words I just used. Our personality, my personality, your personality, my characteristics, your talents, my weaknesses, your gifts. They're mine, they're yours, they're ours. They belong to me, they belong to you, they belong to us. They're not who we are. Who we are is the entity, the thing, the person, whatever it is, that those talents and gifts and strengths and weaknesses and belong to, and that those behaviors are attributed to. So who are we? And if we dig deep all the way down, to the deepest layer of that, to the ultimate, deepest answer to that question, who we are is a piece of divinity, a piece of God. Every single one of us is innately divine deep down inside. Every single one of us is the handiwork of the Creator, crafted by hand, by God, so to speak, if God had hands, right? And what we're made out of is divinity deep down, and then there are layers and layers and layers on top of that, and then each one of us has different characteristics, etc., that are layered on top of that divinity. But deep down inside, who we all are is divinity. So yes, the specifics of who we are as a person effectively are very, very different, right? Some of us are more effective than others. Some of us are more gifted, more talented, more capable, less gifted. Better behaved, worse behaved, more nice, less nice, harder working, more resilient, less resilient. There's so much variation across people, right? There's 7.5 billion people-ish, whatever the number is now. Every single one is unique and different. But those things that make us unique and different are they're not who we are. They're the characteristics with which we interact and present to the world. But they're not who we are. Who we are behind all those characteristics is an instance of divinity, a spark of God, a spark of the Creator. And when we look at that, when we look at who we are, not what are our characteristics, what are the characteristics that are layered on top of who we are, but who we are, every single one of us is identical at that level, at the level of who we are. And every single one of us is going to be exactly equally valuable. Right? None of us has more or less of an intrinsic connection to divinity than the other. None of us has more or less right to participate in the world, to do our bit to uplift the world and to integrate divinity into the world, and to express that inner divinity that we have through our actions and behavior into the world and to uplift it. We're all identically equal as far as all these things are concerned, because we all have the same divinity inside of us. And that is the thing that ultimately makes us as valuable as we are. Because that's more valuable than any gift. It's more valuable than any talent. Divinity is more valuable than any behavior. So as gifted and as talented, etc., as a person is, and as resilient and nice and everything else, the value of the divinity we have deep down inside, that is who we are, is invaluable relative to all of those things combined. It's far more valuable. And so when the Creator is evaluating us, or when the Creator is, thinking or considering how valuable we are, the answer is, every single one of us is going to be identically valuable. No one is any more valuable. No one is any less valuable. So when we were counted, right, it's not like baseball cards or coins or watches or cars, where you've got to count how many of each different variety you have, because different varieties are worth different amounts. There's no such thing as different varieties of divinity, different varieties of the Creator. God forbid, there's one Creator, there's one divinity. And every single one of us has an instance of that divinity inside. So and if that's the most valuable thing about us, that eclipses everything else about us in terms of value, then every single one of us is going to be equally valuable. And when God counts how many of us there are, He's going to count every single one of us equally. Every person is going to be the same equal one unit in this count, regardless of gifts and regardless of talents and regardless of history and regardless of behavior and strengths and weaknesses and everything else. Now, this has a lot to do with, with this week's Torah portion and with its relationship to Shavuos, which is coming up. So Shavuos is coming up, this coming Monday. And what happened on Shavuos, right? On Shavuos, we celebrate, we commemorate the event at Mount Sinai, at Har Sinai, when God gave us the Torah. Now, there are probably, I would say, two big things about the Torah and about our relationship with Torah and about what happened when God gave us the Torah. One of those things is our relationship with God, right? Every single one of us is divine deep, deep down. But Torah is also divine. The information is divine. The guidelines, the instructions, the commandments are divine. So when God gave us the Torah on Mount Sinai, He was giving us a whole new way, a whole new means of connecting our inner divinity to the absolute infinity of God, of the Creator. So one of the things that happened on Shavuos is we got a new pathway, a new way in which we can connect our own natural innate divinity to the absolute infinity of the Creator. And the second thing we got in Torah was guidelines, mitzvahs, commandments, by means of which we can uplift the world, integrate divinity into the world, into physical reality, right? Every time we follow the guidelines of the Torah, every time we interact with the world in a way that, that Torah tells us to, every mitzvah we do, every act of kindness we do, every word of Torah that we study, every time we do any of those things, we are integrating divinity into the world. And so these are the two big things that Torah has given us, gave us, the two big things that changed on Mount Sinai, is our ability or opportunity to connect to the absolute, infinity and divinity of the Creator. And number two, our ability and opportunity to integrate God, to integrate infinity, to integrate divinity into the world through our actions and through the way we behave and live our lives. Now, as far as both of these things are concerned, everything we said earlier is true, right? Our innate connection to the Creator that we have by virtue of who we are is identical, because our connection to the Creator is not first and foremost our innate divinity that we have that makes us connected by birth, by virtue of having been created. Has nothing to do with our gifts or our talents or even our behavior. It has to do with who we are. It has to do with the fact that every one of us has a spark of God inside. And so each of us is the same as far as that's concerned. Our connection to God, our intrinsic, innate connection to the Creator, is equal for every single one of us. None of us is any more or less innately connected to the Creator. And so as far as Shavuos is concerned, as far as the Torah is concerned, in terms of being a means of connecting our innate divinity, connecting who we are to the absolute infinity of the Creator, we're all the same. The value of, connecting that inner divinity to the Creator, to God directly through Torah, is the same for each of us, because that inner divinity that we have is the same. So in preparation, in the lead up to the giving of the Torah, on the way out of Egypt, God counted us, and God counted each of us. Same equal count, one count per individual. Because the counting was in preparation to receiving the Torah. We were counted to express how valuable we are as the, as individuals who have innate divinity, which is why we were given the Torah as an opportunity to connect that innate divinity to God directly through Torah. So when we're counted in terms of that value and in the context of the giving of the Torah, we're each going to be counted the same. And that's part of the reason we read this week's Torah portion, Bamidbar, right before Shavuos, the giving of the Torah, to remind us of that. Because this is something that is so important to remember and to be aware of, especially as we approach Shavuos, and especially as we approach, this day on which we're going to commemorate receiving the Torah from God. Right? The book of Bamidbar is called the book of numbers, or the book of counting, because this week's Torah portion, which is the first Torah portion in the book, opens up with God counting us and counting every single one of us the same, equal, one unit, one count per person. Gifts, talents, behaviors, actions, none of that makes any of us counted as more than one. There's no 1.2, there's no 2, there's no 3, and there's no 0.8 or 0.5 or half or quarter. Every single one of us is the same one count. Because as we approach Shavuos to receive the Torah, to connect our inner divinity to God through Torah, every single one of us has the same innate divinity, and therefore the value, every single one of us has the same innate value, and the value of our opportunity to connect to God through Torah that we received on Shavuos is exactly the same. And so everyone is counted exactly the same. One unit, one count per person. And the second part of Torah and of our relationship with Torah, and the function of Torah in terms of our relationship with the world, with our environment, with the universe, and with God, is that Torah is an opportunity to uplift the world and to integrate divinity into the world by following the guidelines and commandments of Torah, by living life the way that Torah tells us to do that. And every single one of us has equal right to do that. Every single one of us is equally, has equal right to that opportunity. And every single one of us is equally important in terms of the bigger picture of integrating divinity into the world. Now, in terms of the specifics, yes, it's true. Some of us are capable of doing more, in the measurable sense, in terms of, how much Torah we can study, how many people we're able to help, how, gifted we are in terms of helping people, organizing, how predisposed we are to, to doing the right things, how difficult it is for us to do mitzvahs and to follow the guidelines of the Torah. Now, there's always an element of choice there, but in terms of all these things, we are all different, right? And if you want to measure how much can someone do in terms of the measurable difference that we can assess to make a difference in the world, there's going to be a huge range of difference in terms of how much we can do. But those are the specifics and the varieties. But ultimately, in terms of what every one of us, can do and is supposed to do, in the context of my purpose and the meaning of my life and my mission, I have to do everything that I'm capable of doing. And in the context of your purpose and your meaning and your mission, you have to do everything that you're capable of doing. And you might be more capable than me in some things. I might be more capable than you in other things. You might be more capable than me in everything. So in terms of the measurable difference we can make, there might be differences. But ultimately, I am here to make the difference that I can make, and you are here to make the difference that you can make. And God put each of us here to make the difference we can make. And God, gave me everything I need to make the difference I can make, and gave you everything you need to make the difference you can make, and gave every one of us exactly what we need to make the difference each of us is supposed to make. So ultimately, every one of us is able to make the difference we are supposed to make, which means that ultimately, in the bigger picture, every single one of us is equally valuable in terms of that, because every one of us is able to do what we're supposed to do. The specifics are very different, but every one of us needs to be here. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. And every one of us is able to do exactly what we're supposed to do. And if any of us wasn't important, we wouldn't be here. So in terms of Torah as guidelines and giving us the mitzvahs and the means to bring the infinite light of the Creator into the world and to integrate it into the world through our behaviors and our actions, as different as the specifics are, each of us has exactly the same right to engage in that uplifting of the world. And every single one of us has exactly an equally important and valuable ability to do what we're supposed to do in terms of integrating divinity into the world. And that's why this week, this Shabbos, in preparation for Shavuos, which is number one, a commemoration of receiving the Torah the first time, and when we celebrate things and commemorate things, it's not just, a symbolic commemoration of something that happened. It's real. It's alive again. And the same way that our relationship with God went into a whole new category, went to a whole new level when we received the Torah, when we approach Shavuos this year, and when Shavuos comes and we read the 10 Commandments and we listen to them, and we commemorate what happened on Shavuos, we commemorate the giving of the Torah, we are taking our relationship and connection with the Creator up to a whole new level. And in preparation of that, so that we have a healthy perspective of all the context around that when we go into Shavuos, when we go into the festival of the giving of the Torah, which is how we describe it. When we go in to Shavuos to take our connection to God through Torah up to a whole new level, we prepare by reading this week's Parsha, by reading about the fact that we were all counted, and every single one of us was counted equal, same, 1 unit per person. Because every one of us has the same innate divinity, And the importance and value of connecting our innate divinity to the Creator through Torah is exactly the same for every one of us, because every one of us is identically valuable. And the value of each of our opportunities to elevate and uplift the world through the mitzvahs, the commandments, the guidelines, the opportunities that Torah gives us is equally important, insofar as every one of us can do exactly what we're supposed to do, what we need to do, what's needed from us. And every single one of us has the right, the opportunity, the privilege of spending our lives integrating divinity into the world. And the universe, the world, the Jewish people, and the Creator need that from every single one of us, which is why every single one of us is here. And so when we go and receive the Torah, we need to know, and every single one of us needs to know, God gave the Torah to you. And Torah belongs to you. God gave the Torah to you to connect your infinitely valuable innate divinity to the absolute infinity of the Creator through Torah. And you are equally as divine as every single one of us, as every other one of us. You are equally as connected to the Creator innately, intrinsically, as every single one of us. You are equally valuable, and you are equally able to elevate, uplift, and integrate exactly what you are supposed to in the world. The same as every single one of us. You are equally as valuable as every one of us. And you are equally as important. We are all equally important. And the reminder of that is when we read this week's Torah portion and we see that we were all counted as the same one unit. I want to wish you, before tying it all up, that you should merit this Shavuos to receive the Torah deeply and with joy. One last thing before we go, don't forget to subscribe and to click on the notification bell after you do to make sure that you see future videos when they come out. And to help this message reach more people, please share it wherever you share things, social media, WhatsApp status, wherever it is, so that more people can hear this message. This has been the Bites of Judaism podcast. If you haven't yet, you can subscribe on all the major podcast platforms at RabbiGlick.link/podcast. If you'd like to dedicate a future episode of the podcast, send an email to podcast@RabbiGlick.com. See you next week.